how do you delegate your time and work on truly the thing that's the best use of time versus being involved in every little thing. And this is something that has taken me a very long time to figure out.
Awesome. What do I have to understand about like your early background to understand how you got yourself involved in Advex and like why you think you're the best person to really tackle this issue?
Yeah. A little bit of context on my background. So I grew up in the Middle East and I spent most of my childhood obsessed with sports. And I was always a big fan of soccer. It's football, not soccer. But that was the thing that I fell in love when I was like 12, 13 years old. I wanted to become a professional athlete. But when I was around 15, 16, I realized that I was good at soccer, but I wasn't the greatest at it. And everything that I do in life, I have to be the great. Being good is not enough for me. And so what I discovered around junior year of high school was engineering was something that I was always doing as a kid, tinkering with robots ever since I was like 8, 9 years old with my dad. And what I discovered was that, at the time, this is like 2017, 2018, people were talking about AI, but AI was extremely nascent as it is today. And I had this theory, which was, what is going to be the most important technology, the most important thing for humanity the next 100 years? And how can I be at the front and center of it? And to me at the time, the answer was something with artificial intelligence is what I should work on. I didn't really have a strong reason why. It just felt like the right thing to do philosophically, creating intelligence programmatically. And turns out that was a good bet that I made, and sort of we're still very early, but that's what I did in college. I spent a lot of time working on AI, did a bunch of research, but I didn't know who needed AI the most. I was very much the kind of person who was fond of both entrepreneurship, did a bunch of startups in college, but also very much research-minded around, I want to solve for really, really difficult problems. And it turns out that, not every hard problem is valuable, but every valuable problem is extremely hard. And I saw that there were interesting problems in AI by just exploring a bunch. So I started my career doing AI for chip design. And I worked on lots of interesting applications of how do you create really powerful AI systems that can come up with novel chip configurations. So instead of you spending 2+ years coming up with a chip design and then deploying it to hundreds of millions of people, can you just automate all of that? Can you create AI to figure out how to make a chip from scratch? And that taught me a lot of interesting things from product, from research, and just ultimately, what does the world care about? And after that, I did a bunch of work on AI for energy systems. How can you allocate resources such as electricity, water, power to a wide grid of different buildings more efficiently? And turns out that the way that most people receive their energy today is through what is called a rule-based controller, which is essentially between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m., I will receive 30% of my energy load from, let's say, the transformer. And between like 6 a.m. to noon, it might be a little bit lower. Between noon and like closer to midnight, it might go up a little bit. But it was all like very much designed by some guy who's been in the industry for like 20+ years. And there's no way to mathematically predict how much energy should a particular building get. But with the advent of AI, could you automatically predict how much energy you should dedicate to different parts of a city? And so I did a bunch of research, and some of this was with Berkeley, and we did a bunch of work on, can we come up with more deep learning, more AI-based techniques to effectively predict how much energy should you allocate to a lot of different buildings? And as part of this research competition that we ended up winning by like 120%. We like completely obliterated everyone in the competition. And what I learned from there was that AI could be applicable to all kinds of different industries if you truly understand the fundamentals and like the foundation of things. And after that, I was like, you know what? AI for the physical world is cool, but how hard could it be to cure cancer? Like, I'm a very naive guy. And so I started doing AI for drug discovery and medical imaging at this biotech startup in Boston. And there I sort of realized that, and I was working on, all kinds of things with foundation model training, building medical imaging AIs. And from there, what I discovered at Magnus was that ultimately AI is all about the data. I've spent the last 6 years building AI for all kinds of different fields. And the biggest problem I've always had was around data. Every single AI model that you use or see, like ChatGPT, or even like a tiny model that a factory might use, it's all a function of how much data do you have to train these systems. If you have a lot of data, you have powerful AI. But if you don't have any data, good luck. It's all manual. And this was the biggest pain point that I have faced in my career, both as a person in academia and as a person in industry. How can I quickly get access to high quality data? And the genesis of Advex was really, why even worry about collecting data in the real world? Why not just simulate the data? So you don't have to spend 6 months to a year just finding ways of collecting the data. What if I can just build an AI that can just give me the data and really transform these generative models into what I call data agents? And the beauty of this is, instead of now an engineer spending 6 months to a year building a single AI model, we can reduce that time from 6 months to just 6 hours. And that's what we're able to do today with our technology, Advex, which is figure out exactly what data is missing, what kind of information you don't have enough of, and then really leverage these powerful generative models that have come out in the last few years to create high quality but useful data synthetically in just a few amount of hours. And when you have access to this kind of data that is very akin to the real world data, you don't need to spend several months acquiring this in the real world. Just have this data, train a model, and deploy it into production. So that's been sort of the genesis of Advex, and so I guess the origin of why this idea.
So I want to draw, like, going back to like one of the very first things that you started with, and that was like your spirit that you learned from a young age, that you wanted to be like the best at something. It reminds me a lot of like that famous story about Jeff Bezos. Were you aware of that story?
No, tell me more.
Essentially, Jeff Bezos, before he became this big entrepreneur, was a physicist. And one night he was struggling in his dorm trying to figure out this problem set. He's spending hours and hours. Him and his roommates are all putting their brains together, and they're trying to figure out like how to do this. Eventually they give up. They go to their neighbor in the dormitory and they ask him like, hey, do you know how to do this? And the guy is just like, oh yeah, the answer is like 25. And Jeff is like mind blowing. He's like, I took hours on this. Like, how did you just figure that out? And he's like, oh, it reminds me of something I did previously. And like, it just kind of came back to my brain. I think the answer is like reasonably that. And he's like, wow, in the physics world, there's only about like 25 people a year that really shift that field.
Yeah.
Right. And as someone that wants to like be great, he realized that he was not the right person for that field, given how much effort he was putting in. So the fact that you realize that from a very young age is really interesting to me. Like, how did you even like come across that? But like furthering that question more, it's like, with that spirit that you had, right? When you were working on yourself towards building Advex, or maybe gaining the experience, one could say, to like really understand models, how purposeful were you when it came to like, I want to build AI? Like, were you thinking like, I want to build AI for this, I should stay in this industry? Were you just trying to understand the entire scope of like what it meant to build in this space and advance the field?
Yeah.
And then also, I kind of want to tie that into like, what does it mean for Advex to be the greatest now that you're running this company and you still have that spirit inside of you?
Yeah, no, those are really good questions. For me, there's this book that has really affected and almost shifted my way of thinking. And we have one of the values in our company is called be epsilon greedy. And it comes from this book called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned, which I have a problem with the title. I think the title is a little bit an exaggeration. I think greatness can be planned, just not always. And ultimately, what this book talks about, it's written by this guy called Kenneth Stanley. He's this big reinforcement learning guy, and he used to work at OpenAI. And he has this interesting theory, which is if you take a look at some of the most ambitious people in the world, people that are working on extremely hard problems, the way that they got to historically to solve these really, really difficult problems was not to do what everyone else did. Because if you do what everyone else did, you would have the same outcome as everyone else, which is not success. And you can actually think of this practically from how we got to modern day computers. The modern day computers came through some guy, I don't know his name, but this guy that invented the vacuum tube in like 80s or 70s. But the people that invented the vacuum tube, which at the time was this crucible innovation, they had no idea it would lead to the modern computing of today, fully digital. And the same thing goes for why OpenAI won in the first place. Like everyone thought DeepMind would be the company that would take over. OpenAI was this little baby of a startup. But the reason why OpenAI won was because of curiosity. They had this experiment, this idea of what if you just let these models get bigger and bigger and bigger and just give it a shit ton of data and just maybe something might happen. They didn't know for a fact that it would lead to the properties of intelligence and sort of these emergent capabilities that have come since then. But they had this idea of what happens if you just scale these models at a very large level. And really what I'm trying to get at is ultimately when you're solving for these very difficult problems, it is really hard to have a master plan. But it's much easier just having a bunch of hypotheses and just testing it out. And how this plays for me and sort of Advex in general is we don't always have the right answer, but we consistently ask, I would say, the right questions around how do you build powerful models? How do you solve certain problems? And I would say this is like very much true in life as well, which is instead of optimizing for, let's say, a bonus or like some performance metric, what if you optimize for novelty? Just do a bunch of interesting things. And when you do enough interesting things, you might come across some stepping stone that might take you from where you are today to something that's going to be a monumental shift in society some point in the future. But you cannot focus on that because when you make creating, the next greatest technology as your objective, you make that a target. And when you make that a target, you lose the sense of serendipity, which is what every great technology has come from. And this has been sort of the journey for me, even since I was in high school and college, where I just built like close to 40 different projects. Most of them failed. Some of them have been now used over 60 million times, but it was all about curiosity. Just do a lot of interesting things and just hope, fingers crossed, that something might stick. But until you don't find it, just keep exploring.
I think a lot of AI companies right now, like as quickly as the space is like moving, I'm starting to realize like there's this illusion online that everyone's kind of got it figured out. But in reality, everyone's just kind of waiting for each other to really like advance the field. So how do you like project that confidence? Because I know as a startup, you want to be more curious, but to all these companies that have to actually like have confidence in your product to do what you say it does, like how are you able to convince them of that?
Yeah. I think it's a combination of you want to have this relentless optimism about yourself and what you are working on. But at the same time, you need to have this unwavering sense of realism of, okay, if this is not working, I am comfortable enough to make a pivot. And this is really hard. As a company gets bigger and bigger, it's really hard to pivot because you don't know what's going to happen to your team. And really the company is nothing but the team around it. And even for us, like to give you a little story, in the early days, we knew that we wanted to solve the data problem. And for me, like this has been one of the most difficult challenges in AI since the dawn of I guess, deep learning in like 2012, 2013. But we still did not know who would benefit the most from solving the data problem. And but I knew that, if you truly solve this problem, this like hardcore research problem, every company would be a benefactor of our technology. But when you build a startup, when you're good at everything, you're great at nothing. You have to be really, really focused on this one little vertical, one little niche, and become truly the greatest in the world at that. And the way that we figured that out was by talking to thousands and thousands of people. When we started, me and my co-founder in the summer of 2023, we emailed close to 10,000 people. And we asked them a very simple question: where is computer vision being used? Because that's really the background that both me and Pedro have around CV. And we're like, where do you use computer vision? And what are some of your biggest challenges around deploying AI into production? And most people were very helpful, and they were like, okay, these are some of my problems. This is the big bottleneck that I have. And what we discovered was that we talked to people across manufacturing, logistics, biotech. We even worked with a toilet company. We worked with construction companies, all kinds of people. And that was probably the highest amount of learning I've had in a very short amount of time, because we got an exposure into some of the most interesting problem spaces that most people don't have the insight or access to. And from there, we discovered that, holy shit, in the world of manufacturing, people are spending years just collecting a handful of images to train a single model, and they still cannot get it to work. And for manufacturing in particular, what factories care a lot about is automation. Ultimately, what drives the world, manufacturing is, the second largest industry in the world. To me, it represents the backbone of humanity. Everything that you wear, this microphone that we were using, it has come through a manufacturing process. But the thing with manufacturing is that it is rigged with inefficiencies. Everything that you're wearing or that you're using, there have been a lot of parts that have had defects, a lot of parts that took a while to manufacture because humans are, they're great, but they're not the most efficient. They make a lot of mistakes. So what if you make use of robots to assemble things, cameras to detect for defects, to help things move around? And what we discovered is that there is a strong urgency in the world of manufacturing to automate themselves, to make factories be more efficient. And ultimately, a factory cares about two things: production yield, which is how much stuff am I making, and throughput, which is the rate at which I'm making stuff. And a factory wants to optimize on both dimensions. They want to make the most amount of stuff as quickly as possible. But you can only do those two things very, very well if you don't make any defects and if you know exactly how to move things around quickly. But if you have now a large labor force, you're going to be pretty slow. You're only going to move as fast as the slowest worker in the factory. And so for us, when we had that insight, we sort of doubled down on that bet, which was okay, manufacturing was interesting. What if there's more here? And the more we talked to people, the more we realized that this is a problem they wanted to solve yesterday. They are willing to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to companies that are able to help them automate, but they can't automate because it takes them years to collect the data. And what if, and this is what we pitched, I'm like, what if you did not have to spend that much time? What if we just gave you the data and a model that could detect for defects, a model that could help you pick something, a model that could help you figure out what's going wrong inside a factory in just a few days? And they're like, sure, give me the product, I'll pay for it. But we had built nothing at the time. And that was sort of our learning, is just by talking to a bunch of companies and sort of going from there.
That's amazing. The way that you kind of did customer discovery before really building anything out, really putting capital and putting intense amount of time into something. The fact that you were able to find the customer and really speak to their needs. But also, I think earlier in this conversation, before we rolled the camera, previous conversation with you, you were talking about how you're still struggling to find PMF. How could that be possible if you have been able to discover your customer so well?
Yeah. I would say we have promising market fit. We have PMF with an asterisk. For us, the thing that has always been interesting is what we are selling today is a tiny piece of the entire value chain. At the end of the day, our goal at Advex is to automate every single factory in the world. That's something that we are extremely passionate about, because I've flown into, countries in South America and Europe, and I've seen, and obviously California, and I've seen how inefficient things are here. And it doesn't need to be this way. China is superior than every other country when it comes to manufacturing. And the big problem with manufacturing is the labor market shortage, where very few people want to do these kinds of jobs. It's extremely boring. You can just DoorDash instead. And that's way more fulfilling than just going to a factory, picking up an object, and just seeing if it's defective or not. But a big problem that these companies have is with higher fixed costs. Now there's an urgency of, do I still produce stuff as a factory, or am I forced to go out of business because the costs are getting higher and higher? And I am an optimist, and I want factories to be here, because if factories are not here, we're all cooked as an industry, as the world. But the thing with this is manufacturing in general, like these guys want full end-to-end solutions. If all I do is sell you data, the company still needs the ability to train the model, to have the model be embedded inside the camera, to be responsible for providing analytics. We're still solving a very small piece of the entire problem, which is automate the factory. And this is a very intentional decision that we made at the time, which was, and we're not the only company that's doing AI for manufacturing. There's a bunch of people, very smart people, that are working on this problem. And the big difference between our approach and most companies and sort of their strategy has been is, for a lot of the companies, they go directly into the world of manufacturing and then sell them a camera. And they try to automate a critical inspection line or a critical part of the factory. And what they've realized every single time is, okay, now I'm working with this large company, let's say BMW or Shell, or like one of these large manufacturers. And then they realize, like, okay, in order for me to automate, I now need to spend 6 months acquiring the data. And so now they become this consultancy type of company where they're just working back and forth with like Coca-Cola, one of these large manufacturers, and just trying to build them really powerful AIs. And that's something that I have been very much against. And I do not want to build a consultancy. I want to build a product that scales. But if it takes you 6 months to close a single customer because you just need to collect a lot of data, what if we just go backwards? Like, what is truly the meta problem here? It's the data. If you can build a system that doesn't need a lot of information to be able to automate a critical part of the factory, you can start with that and then scale from there. And that has been our big differentiation, which is, let's not go directly inside these factories. Let's perfect the technology. And that's what we did all of last year. Last year was this huge R&D effort that we did as a team, which was all about, hey, is this even technically feasible? Because this is a pretty difficult problem around how do you create information that doesn't exist? And you're really trying to create the unknown unknown. And doing this in a way that's fully automatic is, I would say, is still an unsolved problem. But if you're able to figure that out, and we're getting very, very close with our initial set of customers that are able to see 300 to 500% improvement in model performance, which for them is the difference maker between not having automation to increasing market share as publicly traded companies. And when you're able to solve the data problem, only then do you earn yourself the right to solve the entire vision problem. And that's really where we're headed towards as the outcome of solving more of these interesting research problems.
No, I think your approach is very mature, and for lack of a better way of putting it, because something I learned from working in a startup myself is like, you kind of need those different tiers of visions, right? You need your you need your $1 million vision, your 100 million, and then your $1 billion vision, right? Drawing back to Amazon, Jeff Bezos, it's like he started off with a bookstore and then becoming this worldwide e-commerce store was his $1 billion vision, as opposed to his $1 million vision. So the way you approach that, I love how you plan everything out. In terms of how you find these solutions to these problems, did you end up you said you did a lot of customer data, then you had a hypothesis about is this even possible, and you kind of tinkered around with it. When it comes to researching and testing a hypothesis from a technical perspective, are you really kind of looking at Harvard research papers or other things that have advanced in this field? How are you going about yourself, from a high level overview, of course, without giving away what Advex actually does, but how do you kind of actually implement and discover this way of using code to do what you want?
Yeah. This is what I love the most about what I do, which is, at the end of the day, the product is the research. And it's the nice blend between research and startups. I mean, startups, really, you are running a research experiment. There's this hypothesis that you have about, this is how the world should operate. This is the version of humanity I want to live in. And research is the same thing, which is, here is this really hairy problem, and these are some initial ideas I have on how I can solve it. When you combine the two, the recipe turns into something that's extremely complex. It's very, very difficult. But if you can crack some of these problems, that's how you create a mark in sort of the technology space. And for us, like we're still early enough where we're scratching the surface of what these generative models can do and what you can do with synthetic data. And some of the problems that we now have been able to work on is only possible because we solve for some of the more low-hanging fruits. And going directly after like the nth state solution is not the right approach, because you need to be able to figure out all the stepping stones before it. And this is like the same comment earlier about why greatness cannot be planned. And when we first started the company, it was a combination of I read a paper, I come up with some insight, we test it out. Most of the time it never works. But that one time it works, you're like, okay, maybe there's something here. Maybe we should go deep into this. So you do like a little bit of like breadth first, where you go explore a bunch of ideas, read a bunch of papers, and then you just do a bunch of hypothesis testing. And then you narrow down your search space into this is working, maybe I should double down into this. And then you realize that these ideas have critical limitations, and so you have to backtrace and like find something else. It's very much like traversing the maze of like different types of ideas. And for us, like I'll give you one insight. For Advex, there's two problems. There's the problem of how do I create data? And then the second problem is how do I even know what data to create in the first place? This is what I call the blind spot detection problem, which is all about what information am I missing? What kind of data do I not have enough of? And this problem is something that I personally worked on since I was like a sophomore in college. And this has been something that I've never been able to figure out. And this is like one of those things which has always bothered me, that I can't come up with like really good solution. And the first year at Advex, I was so confident that we will figure this out March of 2023 or March of 2024. And then we're like, okay, the time is up. I still have no good ideas here. And we still spent a very long time trying to figure it out. And then on my flight back home to Qatar, I realized that why do we need to figure this out? Our customers are usually the experts. They are married to their pixels. Pixels here is, the computer vision space. They know exactly what data is missing because they're the ones that want to use Advex. What if we just build a really nice UI, a really cool user experience where they just tell our generative models, give me information like this. This is the kind of data that I'm missing. I will just tell the Advex engine to create more of that data. So what we ended up doing, Magnus, was we inverted the problem of I cannot figure this out. What if the customer just tells us that? And that has been a game changer for us, where previously it would take us a couple of hours to give our customers a 20, 30% boost in performance. Now for the same customers, they're starting to see with this new tool, 500% improvement in performance in the same amount of time. And that was the function of us, in this case, failing to come with a good solution and just telling the customer, hey, why don't you just tell us what to do? And I'm starting to see more of this with our platform is the more things, the more control you give to the user, the more interesting feedback you can get from what leverage you can access on top of these models. Yeah.
I see this big emphasis that you put on like the customer first and like really listening to their problems, but I'm also like thinking about like how you talked about like how you want to stay focused and not get too trailed off in terms of like becoming the one big conglomerate. So I think you touched on it a little bit like 2 points ago, but I would be curious, like how do you kind of filter what you want to do for the customer, despite them saying like, hey, I love your platform, but I wanted to also do yada, 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 right? But you guys want to also stay focused, be able to make sure that you can produce results. When do you see yourself, how do you know when to pull the trigger when it comes to integration and creating more features and taking parts of this startup and then like really combining all into one?
Yeah, this has been a constant battle for us. And I'm also curious to hear your thoughts on this, given your time right now at Revamp. For us, it's been a lot of, like, we'll just listen to what the customer cares about and we'll like come up with some sort of pattern recognition of we're seeing these types of insights across these types of customers and we'll like build something for them. But that was not always the case. In the early days, and this is one big mistake we made, was we said yes to everyone and everything. And when you say yes to everything, you can't build something that generalizes. It's really hard to focus on product. And for most of last year, we were a consultancy shop where a company came to us. We're like, I want data that looks like this. And we're like, bet, we'll give you that kind of data. It would take us 3 to 5 full-time engineering days where my team would spend all kinds of obscene amount of time doing one very bespoke data delivery. And we got it to work. Gave our customers really good results. They saw the value. And then they came back with like an even harder request. And then we realized like, this is not scalable. Like last year, we worked on about 66 different use cases across all kinds of different industries. And gosh, like, let me tell you, there's only 52 weeks in a year. And if each data delivery takes you about a week, there's a lot of all-nighters, there's a lot of Red Bull. And then what we ended up realizing is that we have to say no. And it's not like you're saying no forever, it's just no for now. While we focus on building a product that works and scales, we can come back to you at some point in the future. And that's what we ended up doing, where today for the exact same customer, which would take us 5 full-time engineering days to do a single delivery, today it takes us 6 hours and even better results. But this was the path to saying no and being ruthlessly focused on what really matters at the end of the day, which is how do you build the best model possible with the least amount of data?
What about like, first of all, yeah, that approach makes a lot of sense, right? Like you eventually reach this burnout point where you're trying to figure out like, okay, well, we don't quite have enough money to hire more engineers to be able to solve all these different problems, but we're also not focused enough so that all our customers are paying and actually giving us revenue.
Yeah.
So it's like this weird split that you're in between where you have to just choose your own path, either to hire an engineer and figure it out or to just focus and niche down, be lean.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think your approach makes sense. Just like leaning down, going to the underlying cause and just going to the underlying like problem. Like you've been saying this entire interview, it's just like data. Like that's where everything stems off of. So once you reach a good point where you have a lot of cash and you have a lot of interest from, either if you're raising venture or not, it's like that would be the point where you can actually have engineers and build out more features.
Yeah. So how do you guys figure this out at Revamp?
How do we figure it out?
Yeah.
Oh man, we went to all different types of like ways. So first of all, it was like I don't know what I can say and what I can't, but it's like the customers that gave us the most problems, we realized weren't very. Our best customers have always been hands-free. We are able to provide them with value. They don't put too much pressure on the customer success team to really like cater anything towards them, and life was good. So we begin to realize that our time was getting stretched thin, and our engineering team was also getting stretched thin from growing because we had to keep servicing these loud customers. Yeah. And so similar to what you said of just like saying no, I think it's really important for startups to fire customers that are preventing their growth. Yeah. It's really hard though, because at an early stage, you think you're so dependent on the revenue that comes from them that you fail to realize like there are always better players and people who won't do that. It's like a relationship. There's people that will bring you up, but then there's also people that will just take away all your time and just bring you down. Yeah. Despite there being like maybe that one moment that you guys can like that having a dinner every week like emotionally makes you stable. Well, both can do that, but one gives you shit for it and one doesn't, right? So that's how I kind of see if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, I have a very similar philosophy to that, which is, I mean, ultimately, you do want to solve a hair and fire problem. Like if a customer is asking for these list of features, and if those are not rooted in something that truly makes a lot of sense, because at the end of the day, you would always have more intuition on a problem than your customer, because even though your customer is embedded in their problem, you have more exposure because your customer is only talking to their team, but you're talking to hundreds of companies. So like you see the world at a much more abstract, much more macro level, but at the same time, you won't be fully embedded in any individual workflow. But it's very important even understanding what is the workflow of your customer. What actually walk me through the entire process A to Z on like, how do you build this product? How do you do this specific task? And the thing that I've also learned is it doesn't make sense to ask your customer, what how should my product look like? How should I build this out? Because they're like, I don't know, like that's your job.
Right.
And this has happened to us quite recently too, where I asked a customer, so if you had a tool that did something like this, what would it look like? And the champion was like, I don't know. Can you tell me? But that's really the I would say, founder-led sales is all about, I just hear people, and then at the end of the day, the decision that we have to make is, here are the patterns that we're seeing. Here are some of the pain points that we're seeing. Let's just build something out. And to your point earlier around now with this explosion of these AI-enabled tools, you can hook up and create really fast demos, really quick things to ship, and just see what the customer reacts with. And if there is like a progression towards closing the deal or getting close to closing the deal, then you're headed in the right way and you don't have to spend a ton of time convincing the customer. Because it's always about, okay, I'm hearing this consistent theme. Let me just build something out because I feel like this is what they're really going after. And the cool part of this is the Henry Ford analogy, which is if I ask for, if I ask the world, like, how do I get faster, I guess, how to go from point A to point B in a faster amount of time, they would say, give me faster horses. Therefore, I gave them cars. And it's the same thing here, which is you always need to be on the ground floor hearing what the customer cares about, but you don't need to ask for their consent or tell them, okay, tell me how I should build a product. That's your job. But the more you iterate, the more feedback that you have, the quicker you are in like discovering something that's truly profound.
So in terms of what you're doing right now, would you explain Advex to be more sales-led growth or product-led growth? Because it's a different, like, similar to how I was talking about earlier, like it's a sprint in two different directions, right? It's like you want to be able to talk with all these people, but if your product doesn't do anything, you can't really sell it. So
yeah, no, this has been I would say the biggest thing that we still haven't fully cracked it. We're still early enough where we know ultimately PLG is the way to go. Having something, especially in the world of manufacturing, everything is very hand-holdy. Our customers are not used to a sales process taking less than a quarter. But last year alone, we did about 8 pilots, and our time to close a deal was about 2 quarters. Last quarter alone, we worked on several pilots, and we were able to close them in just a few weeks. And that was because of this product that's fully self-serve today. And that's where we're headed towards, is increasing and enabling this PLG-led growth. And the cool thing about this is, to our customers, they have never seen something fully automated. They're like, okay, so I'm going to have to talk to you 5-6 times before I can give you my data, before I can like deploy this into my factory, and before I can like see an increase in the amount of stuff that I'm manufacturing. But if you make all of that process fully automated, they're going to be shocked. Like, what? This is even possible? That's insane. And if you can do that really, really well, which we are at the cusp of doing, you now have unlocked a completely different way of doing sales. For us, my co-founder, he's been spending a ton of time just going, knocking on the doors, in this case, going to conferences and talking to customers. But now if you had the product doing most of the work for you, you still need to do the typical sales that you would still do before, but the value piece is already up front. You don't need to convince the champion of the value. The value is something that they already see because the product is fully self-serve. But I wouldn't say we're like fully there yet. There's definitely things that we still need to work on the product side as well as on the sales side. But that's what I'm really excited about, is how do you build the Advex growth engine, where even for our customers today, one of our customers are this very large manufacturing company. They build these axles that go into different cars. And we were able to improve their performance for detecting for tiny defects by 500% in less than 6 hours. And after they saw that result, they came back to us and they were like, okay, Advex is really cool for this one use case. I want to pay Advex for 23 use cases, which is amazing. There's an instant exponential growth in us being able to expand into this account. But at the same time, we also couldn't scale that well. Like it was like a certain technical things that we had to figure out. But now we're seeing more and more of that kind of pattern, which is company A will use Advex for one use case. They see success. Now they want to expand into 5, 10, 20, 30 use cases. And that's really exciting. But that's where having this product that just works off the bat comes into play. And if you can do this really well, you have now really disrupted this super archaic industry and made it as powerful as, other industries that are purely reliant on software.
I share that passion, or like the excitement for that. Like you started by talking about how Advex used to be like a self-serve, or not self-serve, a consultancy. Yeah. And like I feel like that's what a lot of like these AI companies like start off as, right? It's like you have all these different systems, but you don't quite know how to all turn it into like one specialized LLM, or I think I don't know if a RAG is the proper way of saying this in this case, but it's like it's like when SaaS exploded, where it's like everyone just kind of buys software, it's printable, and like you are able to use it right away. And same thing, which is so cool about AI agents and like these AI automations, like once we reach that point where everyone's kind of turning into this self-serve model, that's when I think we'll see real growth in this world, But for right now, I want to hear your thoughts on this, but I have a theory that like a lot of AI companies are giving up because they want to be this AI agents, and they want everything to be automated like straight away, that they don't ever take the time to be or humble themselves to be a consultancy first.
What was your guys' approach to this? Because I remember, Stephen, in the early days, you guys were working on a lot of stuff around marketing copy. And like, I remember Stephen and I were chatting back in the early days of Startup HQ around certain customers that are asking for very specific features, and like you have to build a lot of personalized content for them. How have you guys thought about personalization, which in this case would be more bespoke consultancy versus, I guess, to our earlier conversation around saying no and focus?
So what's great about where we're at right now is we've had quite a few customers that we've gone through. We have the luxury to probably say no because we have been able to train a model that properly can distinguish like what copy works and what copy doesn't. So, you mentioned earlier about how like data is like one of the most important things to succeed as like an LLM company, or like becoming like really good in the AI space. Like that's what we're really being able to do. We're able to like specialize in the copy for these e-commerce companies. So in terms of how we don't specialize from that, it's because we have something special that we have. It drives revenue for other businesses. So going outside of that, actually, as of recently, we are expanding and we are starting to have more integrations, but the underlying value proposition is the same. We're just on different platforms. Yeah.
And why expand?
Why expand?
Yeah, I guess what was the impetus for going from your current ICP to expanding?
So with e-commerce businesses, there's so many different tools or platforms that they run their marketing on, that if we just stick to what we've known, which is Klaviyo, which is like the industry standard, we're kind of just restricted to. So in terms of your analogy, like would it'd be almost like if Advex only worked for warehouses that used, I don't know, Excel or something, as opposed to Google Sheets. I have no idea if that's how they actually do databases or not, but like MongoDB or Oracle, it's like you can only service people who have the one platform. But with us, it's like now we're finally expanding it so that we can service other databases, other platforms. So that's where we find the advantage, because we know we've proven that the copy works, and now we just have to be able to implement that to other platforms.
Good. How long do you guys spend time running these experiments?
So as of right now, we haven't fully expanded yet. We are still reaching out to people for potential partnerships to convince them that we can work something out. So in terms of testing, I'm sure it'll look something along the lines of like maybe 2 weeks, trying it out and seeing like if we should focus on this platform or as opposed to a different platform.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like finding like a design partner, a company that you can work with, iterate with them, and then go from there.
It's always great to have also like a champion though, right? Like if we can have one customer that like loves us on that platform, it'll be so much easier, and it'll also boost our confidence a lot more, right? Because we love in startup world, champions like all we have, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. And like my definition of PMF is if you find 10 people or 10 companies in this case, where if you were to remove your product from their workflow, they would be deeply disappointed to the point where they would quit their jobs because you got rid of that one solution. And man, like if you're able to build something like that for those 10 companies to the point where they would like threaten their managers, like, hey, if you get rid of Advex, like I will quit. That is always a great sign.
And what's cool about you guys is like you're essentially just pure enterprise, right? So like once you're in forever.
Yeah.
So building relationships has to be like one of the most important things for you guys.
Yeah, which is why we go to conferences all the time. At the end of the day, like people buy from people, not from companies. And this is something that we discovered very early, where initially our strategy was just cold emails, just send a bunch of emails. We landed this $200 billion company through a cold email. And but there's only so much you can do through a really nice personalized email. But if you're in the same room at the same dinner party as the next big manufacturing company or just any big, large company, there's so much more insights you can exchange. It's the personality. It's you understand things about the person that you couldn't over a phone call. And people want to work with people that they are interested in. And like, especially like part of founder-led sales is in the early days, a lot of people took bet on me and my co-founder because they liked us. And they were like, okay, these guys move so quickly. One of our customers, and this is a pretty funny story, there's this very large automation company. They're one of the largest industrial automation company, where one of the things that they're very well known for making are these electrical panels that are, in most homes in North America. And they had this problem where when they manufacture these electrical panels, there's like these tiny screws that go missing because they're so small, the human eye is unable to detect it. And if, let's say, you sell this to a home in North America or just like any apartment, and there's a screw that's not, there's supposed to be a screw and it's not over there, there's a big risk where the apartment can literally blow up because of some like mishap. And so this customer of ours, what they wanted to do was automate that. They wanted to use cameras and AI systems that could detect for these really, really tiny screws in a very short amount of time. And they started working with this large camera company, and they were able to get it to work about 83% of the time, where about close to 17%, it would not be able to detect for the camera or not be able to detect for the tiny screw. And the problem there is 17% or like 1 in 5 parts would have an anomaly as some sort of a fail case. And that's a very high percentage before you can trust the AI to be able to automate a human or automate that particular job. And so we started talking to them. This was like last July. We were like, okay, we can help you out. We met them through a conference. We can help you out. We'll build you something that will work perfectly for this solution. This was the pitch. And then we start working with them. And those guys are really good at hardware. They're like expert hardware people, but not the best at software, and like really incompetent when it comes to AI. That's just not their specialty. And so we gave them our solution, which at the time was data through a Dropbox folder. Like it was that simple. Everything was extremely manual back in the day. We gave them our solution. We gave them our samples. They tried to run a model, and they were not getting good results. But on our end, I was seeing fantastic results. So I was just shocked that they were unable to replicate what I was seeing. And what happened was this is on like some Thursday and like the heart of July. And we were supposed to talk to their leadership team on Tuesday. And between Thursday and Tuesday, we were seeing dog shit results. Like nothing was working. And I was on this 2-hour-long debugging call with their engineers, where they also mostly spoke in Spanish, and I can't really speak Spanish. And I got so frustrated in the call where I basically told them, hey guys, where on this planet do you live? And I will personally fly out in like the next 6 hours and just fix the problem for you by tomorrow morning. And turns out the factory is based in Mexico. And I booked my flight during the call and just go to the factory, take the red eye, go there in the next morning. And that whole week was just disastrous. We had an engineer who onboarded, and I couldn't spend enough time onboarding him. And we also had these really 2 big accounts that we were in the process of closing. And so I even felt guilty sleeping, just period. Like there were 2 days where I just did not sleep at all. And this was on a Thursday, and we had to get it to work. Like this was like going to be our big customer if we were able to close them. And while I was talking to them about me being there the next morning, they were like, look, even if you come here, we need to get the material to run these experiments. And I wouldn't recommend doing it, but I yelled at them. I was like, hey, you better get the materials. I'm flying over like different part of the country. Just figure out a way of getting the materials. And they were like, okay, just come in one piece and we'll figure everything out in the morning. So I go to this factory and dude, this factory is the size of 3 football fields. It is huge. It's like the biggest thing that I've ever seen. And they're making all kinds of crazy stuff. There's robots everywhere, but it's all like monitored by people. So that was like one insight of like, okay, like even if you have robots, even if you have cameras, they're still controlled by humans. There's no like true intelligence. And so I go to the factory and I'm like working with the people and the engineers there, and then did a bunch of tests, bunch of experiments. And then on Friday between 2 p.m. and 7 p.m., everyone had left the factory except for these 8 engineers and myself. And we're just running a shit ton of experiments to see whether or not Advex was going to work. And finally, at 7 p.m. on Friday, when the entire factory was shut down, we finally got the results. And the results was for this task of detecting for these tiny screws, if you don't use Advex, if you just rely on the existing AI solution, this performance was about 83%, not that great. But when you use Advex, the performance in production went up to 100%. We were able to detect for screws perfectly, like pure 100% performance. And as a researcher, anytime you see a number like 100%, 99%, you're like a little skeptical. And so I was like, guys, this is great, but how about we run this one more time? I just don't buy this. It's too good to be true. So we ran the experiment another time. And consistently, Advex was 100% correct in detecting for these screws. And that was really it. Like that is the part of being extremely obsessed to the point where you'll fly no matter what it takes to close the deal. And from there, we worked with them on several other locations across the world with their Chinese factory. And now we're working with them on other use cases across North America.
How are you able to, first of all, it's a crazy story. Like these are the kinds of things that like make me want to build and become a founder sooner, you know? It's like, I'm sure in the moment, oh, you were probably like pissed, like probably just like in the dumps, but like just having that epic story to tell, it's probably, it feels good.
Yeah. I mean, this is part of risk. Like it could have gone the other way too.
But like the way that you just fearlessly go, these factory workers, like they can barely speak English.
Yeah.
How do you even like communicate that?
ChatGPT.
Actually?
Yeah, just on the voice note. We've had a bunch of prospects that are from Japan where they would be talking amongst themselves in Japanese. And I would just use Whisper to transcribe in real time what they're saying and their criticisms are. And then we would just base our argument during the sales call of like, hey, like this is what they're going to say and this is how we should respond. And this is like one of the advantages of having these like really powerful AI tools just with you at these times.
So let's, all right, we're doing pretty good. But like one of the final points I want to kind of like cover is like, so you talk about how like you're all over the place. I don't know if this is more common now that you guys are expanding, but like you are the heart and soul as a co-founder of like what what Advex is and being like a startup. When you say you wanted to go into like founder-led sales, how do you imagine being able to balance that? You know, like a lot of these AI companies, like you can't. It's really hard. You get stretched in. You either focus on developing or like leading your team. Like where do you slot in time to really make content and really like market yourself?
Yeah. This is a question of delegation. How do you delegate your time and work on truly the thing that's the best use of time versus being involved in every little thing? And this is something that has taken me a very long time to figure out. And one thing is the team you build are the people that should cover all your blind spots. And you really want to build, you want to assemble a set of Avengers where every person is truly the greatest at particular tasks, where they are also comfortable enough generalizing and being good at other things. And this is why I trust my co-founder a lot. Pedro, like he does a lot of sales, but he can't do everything by himself. And so we hired this account executive who has over a decade of sales experience, has closed over $13 million of sales at his last few companies. And the combination of having folks that's technical, people that have been around since day zero, and bringing in new blood to the team that have seen things that we are making incorrect decisions on is really what it takes to build. But at the end of the day, like I would say, we were discussing this before we started, where one of the reasons why you wanted to start a company was you want to have this level of freedom. I would say that is a myth. You will have absolutely no freedom when you build a company, because you are always in like these you're making, there's this thing of decision fatigue, and I definitely have felt this at times, especially when you're making decisions on things that you're not the most confident about. Which is why having advisors, having people that truly are the experts at certain domains, leveraging their feedback, leveraging their thought process is extremely helpful. And it really does take a village to succeed. Like, the team around you is not enough. You need to bring in expertise from really, really smart, sound people. But the other thing that I've learned is it's also important who you take advice from. Sometimes taking advice from the wrong person, or the person who you should not be listening to for everything, can also kill the company. And there's trial by fire. Made a lot of mistakes, and as long as you're able to grow from them, that's all it takes.
Is there anything in like your career that you spent time on that you do regret being in?
What do you mean by that?
Like, I saw that you spent about 4 months or so in 2 different fellowships with 8VC and like KP. But during that time, remind me if I'm wrong, but like you weren't really building. Do you regret like spending that time?
Both of those 2 fellowships was actually, I met my co-founder Pedro through Kleiner Perkins Fellowship, so I cannot complain there. I think that was probably the coolest summer that I have spent. I was building while I was doing those fellowships, but when I first came to San Francisco in 2022, my goal was very simple. I want to find someone to found something with, and I got very lucky where I was doing these fellowships at the same time and was just thrown away by hundreds of people that was talking to every single, like, over the course of several weeks. And the cool thing with being around so many young, ambitious, hungry people is now you get to source who the best people are and what characteristic and traits that you like that someone else also embodies. And for me, the 2 things that I've always been optimizing for are impact and novelty. I want to work on things that's extremely inevitable or non-inevitable, where if you do things that's inevitable, whether or not you do it doesn't matter. Someone else would do it. But if you do something that requires this originality, this creativity, if you're able to win, if you're able to solve that problem, you have changed the fabric of human intelligence, or changed something that's so profoundly different. But doing something that's also impactful is important, because you can spend, and I was considering going into academia for a PhD and just publishing papers back to back. But what I realized, like, at the end of the day, I really want to exponentially improve the lives of billions of people. That is truly what I would say would be my calling, is to be useful. And the combination of being useful while doing things that's novel and interesting is something that Pedro shared deeply as well. And that's why our partnership has been very effective. But yeah, in terms of the fellowships themselves, they definitely gave me a lot of context into different types of people and what kinds of things I like and respect about others.
Just having a pool to go towards, almost like a university. It's always like very helpful to be surrounded by those folks. Yeah. So I can definitely see that. Well, Qasim, right?
Qasim.
Yes. Qasim, it was been a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time. We have a closing tradition on the podcast, or I'm starting one.
You can. This is the first one?
Yeah.
Okay, nice.
But if you had to give advice to other AI companies that are coming up right now, who are probably in the same position you are, pre-seed, seed, what's like one piece of general advice that you would want to give them to ensure that they succeed? I know it's very vague in general. Depends on industry to industry, but as someone who's a CTO and someone who really understands the technology, maybe you have some input on that.
What I would say is, I'm just going to quote Mike Tyson here, which is, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. This is very true in startups. You might have this grandiose agenda of this is how I want to change the world. But if your customers, if your users don't like it, it doesn't matter. And being extremely relentless about what actually matters and what actually your customers care about. And realizing that for the first few years, you're not going to be able to figure this out. It will take a lot of time. It will take a lot of pain and suffering. that is the tried and tested path to greatness. Greatness will cost everything, and sometimes literally cost everything, your health, like your sanity. But the other thing I would say is you're not alone. Like all the pain points that you go through as a startup, like there have been thousands and tens of thousands of companies that have gone through the exact same journey. But whenever you're at your lowest, know that most people give up then. And if you just keep going, know that most people cannot go beyond that point. So half of the battle, I would say, is, or most of the battle, I would say, just showing up and just constantly iterating and not making the same mistake over and over again.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for taking the time today, being very transparent about kind of the issues where Advex is like struggling with, but also providing a lot of insight about what it really means to build like today's world of chaotic AI, and really being able to cut through the noise and give those pieces of advice. I really hope that a lot of people are able to take a lot of value out of this, whether it's from your motivation or like the strategies that you talked about, just like being very intentional about what you build for the customer. I think I really enjoyed today's talk.
Yeah.
So,
thank you. No, this is fun.